What was it?
Roe versus Wade.
Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
So, you guys need to educate us a bit. So, as far as I know, this goes back to the 1950s?
1973.
73, yeah.
Oh, so you want to be smart with me now?
No.
I'm joking. Okay, so 1970?
1973.
Oh, no, that's it. No, it goes 50 years back. No?
Yes.
50 years back, exactly.
All right,
Yeah.
tell us what it's about, how it started, and educate us.
Yeah, you lay down the basics.
Before the Roe v. Wade ruling, abortion was
Keep it in your hand, innit?
illegal in
That way
most
you
states.
can go back and forth.
He's got that. Yeah.
It was illegal in most states because the view was that it was not, because it was not explicitly addressed in the U.S. Constitution,
Yes.
that it would be left to the states to decide what their policies on abortion was.
Okay.
Right? Now, at the time, only a few states allowed abortion. The rest, it was completely outlawed with few exceptions.
Yes.
Right? And then this legal case comes along in the state of Texas. It goes through the courts, and the Supreme Court decided on January 22nd, 1973, that in fact there was a constitutional right to an abortion, despite the fact that it wasn't explicitly mentioned in the text.
Okay.
Right? And part of this came from an earlier ruling called Griswold v. Connecticut, which was a constitutional case that said people have a right to access birth control.
Okay.
Right? And so there are 9 members of the Supreme Court. In a 7-2 ruling, they found that in fact the Constitution does protect the right to an abortion across America.
Okay, interesting.
So that's just a little look into
From that
the
moment
case.
onwards, just so we know, did all the states agree to this?
No. So the way it works is, in America, if you want to get a constitutional amendment through, all of the states have to agree. But the way the Supreme Court works is this: members of the court, a majority of them, determine how the Constitution is interpreted.
Okay.
Right? And so how they see the Constitution, that's the way it is.
Okay.
Right? So the president appoints a member of the Supreme Court, and the U.S. Senate, which is made up of 2 members per state, they have an up or down vote. If more than half of them approve of the pick, then they get put on the Supreme Court until they either retire or die.
Okay, interesting. So, as a Muslim, what's our stance on this? Like, I'll be honest with you, to me it was success. I was happy. What's our take on it?
What's the conclusion from that case, though? Does that mean...
From this case or from Roe v. Wade?
So now, what's the position of abortion
in America?
In America.
So, go ahead.
So essentially right now it's being left up to the states. So overturning Roe v. Wade, previously it was federally imposed on a national level that you could not force a woman essentially to give birth if she...
So the finding of Roe v. Wade, and then later this case called Planned Parenthood v. Casey, was that you can restrict abortion at a certain point in the pregnancy. Okay. So like in Roe v. Wade, I think it was the first trimester. The second trimester, you could put regulations, and then if the state wanted, they could just ban it out right in the third trimester. Then in 1992, there was a case called Planned Parenthood v. Casey, where they said no, that's not the standard. The standard is it's up to the point of viability. So if a fetus is viable, then a state can ban it. But before that, they can't ban it.
So okay, so when you say viable, so you're saying when it's like...
so what's happening now?
ambiguous,
It's
right?
kind of, it's a medical term.
Okay.
And I'm not a medical professional. I don't
So
feel...
do you know what they mean by that? So is it like, for example, when it's 8 months, 7 months? And when
Yeah,
it's in the
viable
state-
is 24 weeks by their measure.
So
Okay,
what's that?
24.
Kinda
So
like
then,
6 months.
So then,
Yeah.
what is okay? So at that moment of time, when it's let's say 24 weeks, the state has a power to do what? Tell
After
them they
20
cannot have abortion, or
They can ban it.
they can ban
Yeah,
the
so
abortion.
no abortions after
Right,
24
Okay,
right.
so was this a majority of the? How many states are there in America?
56.
50 states.
Yeah.
So again, it's the Supreme Court, so it's not states deciding. It's the
Okay.
member. So
Right.
right now, what happened?
Well, they overturned it.
Right. What happened 2 days ago is the Supreme Court said that because there is no explicit reference to abortion in the Constitution, it's left up to the states, and they can do whatever they want. So, for instance, California a liberal state,
Oh, yeah,
can have a very liberal position on abortion.
Right, and
Okay.
some
Whereas
conservative
Alabama,
states-
which is a very right-wing state, can have a very right-wing
Okay,
position.
okay.
Right, so what we're seeing in some states in the U.S. essentially
The
is
polar
it's a full
extremes.
restriction on abortion, even in cases of rape, incest, whatever. Like you can never get an abortion. Like it's completely
You
against the
can
law.
never get an abortion.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah,
They're saying you
well,
can
what
never get
I'm
an abortion.
seeing is maybe the exception for life of the mother. That's it.
Okay.
In
So
some
there is
states.
an exception.
That's like the only exception.
Only exception. Wow.
That's
okay.
the only
Rape
exception.
and incest are not an exception.
For
in
some of the
these
states
yeah.
we're
Okay.
seeing, so far that's not an exception. Now,
Okay.
my view,
Wow, I didn't know that.
if we're talking about interpreting the law, so I have.
Oh, wait,
I-
dude, let's
Go
let's
ahead,
get
go
yeah,
ahead,
let's get
go
started
ahead.
in the
No,
conversation.
Yeah,
no,
please,
we're-
please.
By the way, we're learning from you. We're enjoying
Okay.
this. It's good because
Okay.
we're understanding. So isn't that fair that they're saying, okay, if you're a liberal state, you do what you want to say, and if you're strict, yeah, more conservative, what's wrong with that? Why is it an uproar? Because I'm
Well,
seeing
because so I believe in the Constitution.
Yeah.
I believe in the rule of law.
Yeah.
And if we want to interpret the Constitution fairly, so there are arguments on the conservative side that say abortion is not referenced in the Constitution.
Okay.
So therefore, it's left up to the states. And on top of that, at the time of the writing of the Constitution and the writing of all of the amendments that preceded it, it wasn't understood that abortion was a right that was protected even as an inference. Now my counter to those 2 points would be number one, when the Constitution was written, I don't think it was applied reasonably and fairly. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is the Constitution explicitly gave men rights over government, right? But the problem with that is the Supreme Court at the time of the founding of the Constitution, and society at large, didn't believe black men were the same as white men. They didn't
Okay.
believe them to be human beings. That's why I don't share the view that we should look at the Constitution through the lens of when laws were written. Because if you want to apply the law reasonably and fairly, you can have that view, in my view.
So what do you think needs to be done?
About what?
So you're saying we don't take the laws from the Constitution, it should be changed or modified or...
I don't think they should be changed. I would amend the Constitution. But as the Constitution is written right now, I think actually it does infer a right to abortion. I would argue that just because something isn't explicitly written in the Constitution doesn't mean that it's not a guaranteed right. So in the Constitution, for instance, there's no explicit right to breathe. There's nothing in the Constitution that says explicitly you have a right to breathe. But no one would argue that you don't have a right to breathe.
Isn't there something to do with life, liberty and
Yes,
justice?
but that's implied. That would mean it's inferred, right?
So they're saying they do the same thing. They say it's inferred when it comes to abortion.
Right.
Right, so it would come down to the idea of life would come down again to the common debate within the abortion
Yeah.
topic of when does it begin, when would you apply it, and
Yeah.
when would you consider it life.
So-
Obviously, in some more conservative states, they would say life begins essentially at conception or fertilization even, and more liberal states would say no, it doesn't begin then. So again, it
It's
kind of
different with
does.
us as well. Let's
I
put
think
it
I
into-
think I think the problem here is, and that's the thing with liberalism, it's just so vast, and it's left to the sensibilities of man at the end of the day. Like you rightfully said at that time, Dave Chappelle has this sketch in which he's saying Abraham Lincoln's right in the Constitution, and then there's a slave and he's just saying, "Shut up and bring me this. Everybody has a right to justice and freedom. Shut up. Where's my coffee?"
right.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So look, that's why liberalism, as a morality, it doesn't have a strong,
Well, would
strong
you argue
foundation.
that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were liberals? I wouldn't.
What they're saying, the Constitution is inherently based upon liberalism. That's what it's based upon. Modern day America is based upon liberal values. John Locke, Kant, John Rawls. John Rawls has influence even in this country as well. So to say that those people are totally separate, no, I wouldn't say that. I'd say they are the flag bearers of liberalism. Yes, indeed, things have become developed further, but inherently, the point is, anyone who we have a discussion with here inherently goes to the Bentham principle of pleasure and pain. And like you've rightly pointed out, it's down to the understanding of the average individual and their subjective moral basis. I think this is right in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think this is right based upon my opinion. Then you've got certain opinions like in France. It's a liberal, supposed liberal
Right,
society.
right.
Yeah.
And according to liberalism, you shouldn't technically tell women how to dress.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it's so ironic. Yesterday, Emmanuel Macron, after the Roe versus Wade case, he said, I feel for these women and their right to choose.
Yeah.
People are going, hang on a minute right here.
Yeah.
What are you banging on about?
Right, right,
You. How are you able to say this? So
When they've banned the burkini now in,
Yeah.
in Iran.
the
Right, of course,
burkini,
yeah,
the hijab in certain places, the niqab.
Did
it's-
he
Why am I-
supported the banning of the
Of
burqa?
course he
Why
did.
am I-
And it's done under the guise of liberalism.
Yeah,
So the
exactly.
point is their liberalism is applied in one facet and one context. You go to Switzerland, who's seen as one of the most democratic countries
Well,
because
they actually are. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, go for it.
They're very xenophobic. They're very.
They are, exactly.
aggressive
Yeah,
to
they are very
immigrants.
but do you see like
Which
according
frustrates me because when I'm sorry, I interrupted
No,
you.
go for it.
When I see them at the World Cup, their squad is very international.
Exactly.
Yet
Same with
they
France.
they
Same
deport
with-
people
especially
all the
France,
time.
yeah.
I think Switzerland is
No, but as long
particularly bad.
as long as they're winning the game, like Mesut
Yeah.
Ozil said, he
Right,
said, "I'm a
that is
German
true.
when I'm winning, but I'm a Turk when I'm
No,
losing."
it's true. That's exactly
Yeah.
how it is.
So
with Switzerland,
pressure.
the thing is Switzerland is divided into cantons.
Yes.
So according to a democratic society, Switzerland would be seen as the epitome of democracy. However, when I went to Switzerland, I mean minarets on a mosque. How is that hurting anyone? But they have decided in the infinite wisdom that minarets are to be banned. So ideally speaking, in a liberal country, even in this country, if they voted for Islamic values, under liberalism, you would do it. Even if you would come up with something absurd like, let's just say it's post Russia versus Ukraine, and we are now starving and we are to eat each other. Well, if you vote for it, it's okay, because even with the harm principle, you're not harming the person, they're dead. And as long as the doctor says, no, it's okay, it's fresh meat, just make sure it hasn't surpassed this amount of days, well, let's get the fork and knife out, and let's get the salt and pepper out.
Right. So
Yeah.
let me see if I can go through this like little by little, because there was a lot that was said. So starting with kind of the idea of Macron and like a woman's right to choose, I do think that's hypocritical. I do, to be completely honest. I'm not speaking for you or your stance, but I personally think it is hypocritical. I
Thank
would
you.
agree that like
Thank you, I think
if
that's
you're
honest
gonna
of you.
take like a liberal stance, which in my opinion, ideally he should take, but like you can't be saying like, oh, like
yeah.
you know, women have the right to choose when it comes to an abortion, but Muslim women can't dress how they want. Like, I think that's completely hypocritical. I'm against that. I think that's dumb.
But sorry, is your name Josh?
Yeah.
So, but the point, Josh, here is it's still feasible within the liberal framework that a liberal can say what he's done is technically correct.
I would disagree.
I wouldn't
see, how
necessarily
so?
agree. Yeah, I
How
wouldn't
so?
necessarily agree.
Because at the end of the day, liberalism, one of its core pillars is allowing human beings to choose how they want to live their lives. And saying you can't wear a burkini, in my view, is opposed to that position. Does that make
Interesting,
sense?
interesting.
I understand what you're saying,
But-
that's my view of liberalism.
But I will raise you, I will raise you the social contract.
Uh-huh.
And I would say within the social contract, Macron is well within his rights to do what he did. And a
But does that make it liberal?
It is, because there's no, in fact, that would be a challenge. Give me one liberal society today that does not adhere to the social contract.
One liberal society that
Does
does
not adhere to the social construct of what liberalism in general, like
The social contract.
Yeah, to the social.
Well, I mean, I would say there are liberal societies that strive to fulfill their social contract that don't always. I think a good example would be police brutality in the United States, right?
But in terms of the social contract, which liberal society is functioning without a social contract?
Functioning.
Okay, well that's fair. I mean, to be honest, like
born-
every society has a
born
social
into it.
construct
Right,
because
right.
without it would be kind of anarchy, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if
exactly.
we're not engaging with each other in a way where we can all be kind of like
Exactly.
understand,
But
like
that-
okay,
that
you're not
comes-
supposed to harm
yeah.
somebody, you're not supposed
But that
to.
comes with regulation. So,
No,
you
the
know,
thing is, that is the peak of liberalism, the social contract. That's where you've got Locke saying in Mosaic law, apostasy, killing the apostate is okay. Kant, he said also that in a society it's feasible. In fact, Rawls says that if the leaders tell you to stand in front of a cannon, then do it. So these are flag bearers of liberalism. The point, the point. I'm not saying that. Look, this is what we're to do. Point that I'm trying to say is, it's feasible in liberalism that under the social contract, these supposedly anarchic, these supposedly unjust things can be seen as okay. Why? Because there's no such thing as objective morality. There's no such thing as objective morality.
All problems.
Yeah, which is, and that's why with abortion, you could technically, it depends on the majority. If the majority comes and says none at all, nothing, and people vote on it, what are you going to do?
Well, in America, were you done? I don't.
No, go ahead.
I've interrupted you a bunch of
It's
times.
okay.
I don't want to.
It's okay.
In the case of abortion in America, I wouldn't equate it to a matter of the majority. I would equate it to a matter of the Constitution, because the majority doesn't have a direct influence on the Constitution. There are all these mechanisms and different institutions involved in amending the Constitution. So I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a matter of the majority. You need an overwhelming majority. In fact, I read one study that said 3% of the US population, if it was strategically organized, could stop any constitutional amendment. Just 3%.
But would you also agree that the Constitution can be interpreted in many ways by many
Absolutely.
states?
Yes, it can.
And that's exactly why we are where we
at
are.
the root of what's happening right now. 50
Exactly.
years ago, there was an interpretation that was applied that said, okay, Roe v. Wade, no abortion. Now, 50 years
Yeah.
later, the interpretation
And it's the
is
same
modified.
framework, yeah.
So I will concede to that. I do think that there is a greater sort of agenda from the conservatives towards interpreting the Constitution that way. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the way that
And
the
I
average
would
American
also-
would interpret it.
Yeah,
But like,
and I would also say it depends on the. Sorry, bro.
No,
I'm
it's okay.
just going to make this point.
No, please.
The what you have to understand is the leadership is actually subject a lot to the sensibilities of the population. What I mean by that is, there's a reason why the Labour Party is suffering, especially under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, because majority of the Brits vibed more with the conservative and the more centre or centre-right view. And that's why even Keir Starmer is now kowtowing to that. In Australia, there's more leaning to the right. Bolsonaro of Brazil, leaning to the right. Modi of India, leaning to the right. Trump, leading to the right. In fact, some are even saying that when he comes back again, he's more likely to come back in power. So it's because of, Trump. And it's because of this
This
that,
is an honest enemy.
yeah. So with regards to these people that, look, point that I'm trying to say is there's scope for both in liberalism. And at the end of the day, it is what the majority say. And in America, if the majority are the conservatives, then you are going to see more conservative laws. If majority are liberals, then you're going to see that the laws are more to do with the liberals.
wouldn't you say though that to some degree keeps a check on the people in power, because you have to respond to what the population wants, because then they're going to vote you in later? Like, doesn't that to a certain
You
extent?
have option of 2 to 3 people.
No. That's a good point, but that's the reason people like Plato, and Nietzsche, all of these guys despise the democracy. Plato is an absolute, he's unapologetic. In fact, most of these philosophers did not vibe with democracy at all. If they were alive now, they would be advocating anti-democracy. Why? Because how can you trust somebody that doesn't have the understanding of the intricacies of leadership to come up with a law that's going to affect the fate of the country? That's why you had all these philosophers. And that's why even in Islamically as well, we say, look, can't rely on the general public, because they're like trees swaying with the wind.
Exactly.
Yeah, if like in Pakistan, just an example that comes to mind is their understanding of taking the current ruler down or him moving.
Imran Khan?
Yeah, Imran Khan, they were saying it's a good thing. When you ask the average layperson, they said, yeah, it's good because such and such thing is now expensive. So the average layman is basing a ruler and the presence of a ruler and the
exactly.
absence of a ruler based upon
the
how
price of
much
tea.
on the price on the price of
What do
tea.
you-
But wouldn't the
Go ahead.
solution to be that be increasing education within the populace so that people are more aware of what's going on
But
instead of
still it's chaos.
But
Look at
popul,
that.
but sorry, bro.
But
go
isn't
ahead.
that
Not populism, but just
Aren't we
increasing-
I mean, isn't that more populism than liberalism?
The thing is, I think he's made an interesting point, which is, should you increase education? But who is the, like Noam Chomsky said, the people writing the history books are the